Screen.
Recording started.
Welcome everybody to this week's Matrexit discussion group call for tactical sovereignty. Like I always say, this wonderful Sunday, the first day of the week, not the 7th, and therefore not the Sabbath. I hope everybody's doing well. Things are slowly returning back to some sort of a vision of normal down here on Southwest Florida. Although for things to get back to fully normal, probably will take another year or so. If nobody's been through a hurricane, it's kind of hard to realize what happens when these events occur down here. But anyway, a couple of the members of Tactical Sovereignty group were on here with us, and we're just chit-chatting. And so we're just going to, I think, continue with that format this evening. Joe was talking with me a few minutes ago. How are you doing, Joe? You still with us?
Yes, I am. Still here.
All right. Good.
Doing good, thank you. So my question, I'm guessing that's where we're going to. My question was, how does an unincorporated DBA business, how does the unincorporated differentiate from the others, the incorporated and the others that there are?
Yeah, the others are, incorporated or a corporate structure, which can mean that it's either an LLC, a trust, organization, a whole list of various entities it can be. But the reason for going unincorporated for me is kind of twofold. One is realizing what the word incorporated means. And that means that it is using something else, or it's a part of something else, or is joined in with something else. It is typically not a situation that would be observed as a sole proprietorship would be, because it's going to have other entities involved with it. And most commonly, what people I think don't realize when they're incorporated is that these corporations, that other part that they are incorporated in with is the state. And so that's briefly the one reason. And the second reason as well is that when you read through all of the different laws, codes, statutes, regulations, all that kind of stuff for different things when it comes to business, it all refers to corporations. You don't find anywhere where it's referring to unincorporated entities. And so for me, that was just another kind of wall between you and the state, is operating as being unincorporated, because they don't have anything set up to dictate what an unincorporated business or unincorporated entity can and can't do. So I just saw that as definitely a positive feature of it.
Okay, well, that makes sense. So, however you do business through an unincorporated business, they have little to no strings they can pull to control your DBA if you're unincorporated. Is that basically what you're saying?
Right. And then again, that means that any like contracts that you enter into with different things that you're doing, you're going to have to look at those contracts a little bit differently. We can't just take, blank slate or whatever and just sign without looking like everybody else does. That's where, if you're presented with a contract, you may want to draw a line through some of the things you don't agree with or whatever. And providing that this is going to be a bilateral contract and not a unilateral contract. Unilateral contracts are mostly what's presented to people, which is kind of a take it or leave it contract. And you don't really have a full meeting of the minds. I guess the meeting of the minds is assumed to have occurred because you sign it. You agree to all those terms and conditions for that contract. But yeah, so I mean, being unincorporated and operating more privately means maybe looking at those contracts a little bit differently. And as well, if say you're running your own business, for instance, let's say you are cleaning houses for people, okay, and you've got like a made-to-order business. That'd be kind of a catchy name for one. But say you're running a business like that, then what you're going to do, and you can do the same thing even if you're operating, say, a barber shop or a salon, something like that, is that instead of being a typical public business, you can operate it as a private association. And so that the customers that you have just aren't random customers, but they're actually members of the business that you're running. And so now that means that there's a contract between you and these other people for services to be provided. I remember different situations I've looked at where they've closed down businesses in different areas for whatever various reasons. Let's say like a weather situation, like recently happened here in Florida, is that the ones that stay open or the ones where the business has a contract with its customers. I remember a couple of years ago, even during the whole pandemic thing, that there was a time where like beaches were shut down, restaurants were shut down. And I put out a little meme on Facebook. I don't know how many people picked up on it. It was like only one comment that I could tell that it really clicked in somebody's head. But I just showed a picture that, hey, I know a place where you can go to the beach, you can go play beach volleyball, you can go get your hair cut if you want, you can go out to eat. The facilities are all fully open. And to me, that is an excellent reason to be operating more in the private, because even in the Constitution, it states that no state really can interfere with a private contract, private agreements. And so that's a protection right there of operating more privately, if that makes sense to you.
Okay, that makes sense. So private contracts would be just you come up with a contract ahead of time and you offer it to them, and of course they agree. That's how business works, and you can kind of do whatever you want to within the confines of that private contract.
Yeah, exactly. Say, for instance, if you have a barber shop, that you just put in your agreement that, it can just be a simple one paragraph agreement, with them for their membership order, that you agree to supply a minimum of one haircut per week to them and any of their other family members. Cut and dried, that simple. And their dues for their membership are included in the service of the haircut. So there's really no extra expense for them either.
Okay. So you may or may not know much about this, and you probably do, but I'm going to ask anyways. E-contracts, like for instance, any agreements you get into through the computer, by accepting those, you're under that contract, obviously, but is there any way to make that a bilateral contract, or is it just what it is, whatever it is, it is?
Well, you can take a unilateral contract and then present to the other party who's presenting this contract to you and tell them, hey, I like this contract, this, although I think this needs to be altered or that needs to be changed, at which time I'll be able to accept the contract. And if they will sit down and basically bargain or dicker with you, negotiate the contract, then now it's turning into a bilateral contract instead of just something that's one-sided like a unilateral contract is. However, I will say, take the most popular contract that people sign. They sign up for it when they're, 15, 16 years old, and that would be the driver's license. When they sign a driver's license. That would be a strictly unilateral contract. There's no way of reversing something like that or changing it into a bilateral, because the party that has presented that contract ultimately is the Secretary of State. All right. And the people that you're talking to, at the Department of Motor Vehicles or the Bureau of Motor Vehicles or a Secretary of State office, they're just employees of a private company that has a contract with the Secretary of State. And they don't know anything about that contract. They don't want to know anything about that contract. Their job is just to have you sign it. And, if you don't, you don't. If you do, you do. They really don't care. And there's not going to be any real negotiations in that kind of a situation, if that makes sense.
That makes sense, and I'm kind of out of questions.
All right, that's cool. But yeah, I think when it comes to contracts, it's one of these things that more people enter into them than they realize. And a lot of people want to say, for instance, that there's like 7 requirements for a contract. I've even seen longer lists than that, but that there's got to be a meeting of the minds, and both parties have to sign it. And some people think you have to be at least 18 years old. And I even heard somebody recently, a guru on YouTube, has a huge following. He was even answering a question for somebody that was asking about contracts, and they're talking about something with their son or daughter when they were 16 years old. It wasn't the driver's license, but they're talking about it. And he said, "Oh, no." He said, at that age, they're not 18 yet, so they can't sign a contract, which is completely untrue. I mean, you grow up signing contracts all your life. And some of the first ones that you actually sign into and agree to will be, for instance, I mean, if you start working at, say, 15 years old or younger, and you have to fill out W-4 tax returns, things like that, you're contracting. You're contracting right there with the IRS. You go and get the driver's license, for instance. Like I mentioned, you sign that at 15 or 16 years old. You're signing a contract. There is no requirement for you to be at least 18 years old in order to sign a contract. And this is done by everybody when they're very young. And it should be obvious. And not all contracts, even like I was mentioning, like people talk about 2 parties signing it. Not all contracts are even required to have 2 parties sign it. In fact, not all contracts are even written down. Not all of them are even on paper. There's also implied contracts. People can go look up the definition of an implied contract. Those occur all the time. And a lot of times the contracts that we've done, and when I say contract, think of the word consent as well. Most of these contracts that we do, or the consent that we provide, is really more often done through our actions rather than by signing on a dotted line. Just through performance. Through our performance, we show that we are agreeing to whatever the terms may be. Same thing happens, just for instance, if you go into a store, the stores have their conduct that they expect from the customers. And it's an implied contract that if you want a product, that you're going to go to the cash register and you're going to pay for it in the amount that they're requesting, and then you're going to peacefully leave the premises. But right there, you're following an implied contract. And there's also constructive contracts. Those happen most often in court. But those constructive contracts are like I said, basically just an implied contract. It's no difference. And so it's not always going to be, your name on a dotted line. Now, I would as well really recommend to people that there's going to be situations in life where you're going to have, say, a contract that's called a user agreement. This is a popular place you would see this at, where you're going to sign on a dotted line agreeing to whatever terms and conditions that may relate to that user agreement. Or if you're participating in an event, a lot of times there's signatures that are required. Sometimes that'll be for advertisement reasons. Businesses will even do that as well, and have you sign a release, basically, most often for advertisement reasons. And I would recommend that any of those kind of contracts as well, when you're going and putting your John Hancock on there, put an expiration date right after it as well. If you figure that this event is only going to last for a couple days, date it. That don't leave your consent or your agreement to the contract open-ended. To me, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make, is leaving those things open-ended. Always go and put an expiration date on there, so that that this signature is good from X date of being signed until whatever date you decide to put on it. Maybe you just might want to have some of those contracts expire at the end of the year. If those businesses or those people are paying attention, and say maybe you're even still working for a company, for instance, and if it's that important to them, they'll come back to you with that agreement again and have you sign a new one since the old one has expired, since your old signature, your old autograph has expired. If they're paying close attention and astute in those ways, which most of them never are, they would do that, but they don't. So yeah, always go and put an expiration date on it. And when it comes to signatures as well, whenever you're doing any correspondence, really, I would say of any kind, everybody has been taught, that you sign it, truly yours or whatever, comma, or in appreciation, comma, John Henry Doe or your John Hancock. And I really couldn't disagree with that more. I say any correspondence that you're doing with pretty much anybody, unless you're writing your grandmother a letter, unless you're sending her a birthday card, you never put your signature or your autograph on anything, period. I think you'll notice a lot of times you receive correspondence from various companies, and you'll just see the typed name of someone at the end of the letter. They're not going and throwing their autograph or their signature out there for people. And this is recommended by a lot of companies as well, especially like if you look at different programs for like credit repair. Every credit repair company that I ever really looked at, the things that they were telling people to do or not do, one of the things that was in common with all of them was never give your signature, never put your autograph on anything, because those can always be transcribed somewhere else and added to something else. And that can put people in a bit of a situation, especially in a legal proceeding. That's one of the things the administrator is going to look at. They're going to say, well, I see your autograph here, and it looks like the same one on a driver's license or the same one on this other correspondence, so it's obviously yours. And now you're in a situation of having to prove a negative, which can't be done. So yeah, just don't be going out there and throwing that signature or that autograph out there willy-nilly for everybody and their brother to pick up and use and abuse. And the same thing goes with the ridiculous idea of putting that red thumbprint on stuff. That's your biological DNA. You don't give that stuff away. That's your personally identifiable information. Hey, just don't throw that stuff out there. And some people want to look at the thumbprint as being a seal, and if you do, that's fine. But go ahead and only use that seal for your in-house documents, or the documents that you keep in your file cabinet. Don't put that on stuff that's going out for the public or the general public to see. Besides, that kind of just throws that freaking crazy sovereign citizen tag on whatever you do anyway. So, like I say, just keep things simple. Keep things simple. And be careful of who you're giving all of your personally identifiable information to. And that includes the autograph or the signature. I know John was here with us as well. He clicked in a little bit ago. Anybody else have anything? Feel free, guys.
How about purple ink?
About what?
How about purple ink?
I don't care what color ink it is. Purple, green, orange, yeah, black, blue. Don't throw that thumbprint out there into the general public. That's for in-house documents. That's how you know. For instance, that's one way that you can make sure and determine that you have an original document in your file. You know, if it's got your seal on it, if it's got your thumbprint on it, then you know that's your original. But those stay in-house. Those aren't for the masses.
Wow. How many people told us to use purple or red ink or gold? No, it's gold sometimes. Just crazy.
Or gold, yeah.
I mean, what the hell is gold ink? I mean, come on.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff out there that, you know, all this started back, I think, in the 70s, really, and when a lot of the mass communications were really starting to pick up with like the patriot groups and things like that. And, you know, it was, you know, the gold is for the king, purple is royalty, which purple can be a mix of the red and the blue, and that the blue was for corporate, the red was for a living man, which I don't know who else they would think is signing something other than a living man, and that black was for fiction. Um, and they also, you know, said, oh, if you can go out there and find them, you know, get those red fox stamps, put up one of those, the $1 red fox stamp or something like that on your document. And, you know, oh, sign it at a 45-degree angle. And I think they said just about everything other than, you know, throwing salt over your left shoulder for good luck. I mean, a lot of those things are just ridiculous. They have no weight. They don't do anything. It makes you feel like you're doing stuff when, well, you are doing something. What you're basically doing is showing whoever you're sending that document to that you have legally absolutely no clue what's going on. That's the only thing you're doing.
Yeah, or using blue ink because we're coming in from the sea. If we're a vessel or something, right?
Right.
Another hoax.
Yeah, and that's the whole talk of admiralty law, um, which actually it's maritime law and admiralty jurisdiction. A little distinction there with that. But what's running in the courts today is administrative law, is what's operating. It's not admiralty jurisdiction or maritime law. That's not what's running at all. Although there are some aspects to the maritime law that has been adopted by today's administrative law, they have adopted some aspects of the maritime law. One of the best examples of that would be a quick and speedy trial, because that's what they had to have with maritime. Because this all came from the ships, and the reason why they needed that quick and speedy trial is because it might be people that were working aboard one of the vessels that was at dock, and they were there during high tide, and they needed to have a quick and speedy trial because before low tide came, that individual had to be back on board his vessel and was going to be gone. And so you'll see an example of it there with, you know, the quick and speedy trial. Even when it comes like to bail, maybe you'll see an aspect of maritime law there with bail. But overall, I would recommend people, if they can ever have a chance to view, and I don't think there might be some online, yeah, if you could watch any proceedings in a maritime court and see what goes on, because it's very, very different. Now, there are cases online you can read what happens, and the cases in maritime law are very, very different than the procedure that's followed with administrative law, like night and day almost.
Right. So they're like statutory in nature, the courts, but it's really military jurisdiction.
Yeah, and I mean that's coming into a situation of what came first, the chicken or the egg. You know what I mean? Um, the military or their statutory laws, and I think that they're all kind of one and the same. That's the way I look at it.
Right. Yeah. Well,
But I think a lot of those things, and this is why I said that when I first started studying and reading about all these alternative ideas regarding what's going on and what's running the show today, that's why I have put aside all of the gurus, wannabe gurus, teachers, whatever they are, and just dug in and started reading the stuff that was really in print, the stuff that was really in force, learning the history of the different laws and forms of law to comprehend what's really going on, and get your, I understood civics fairly well from school. That was something I excelled in, and did a little more further study into civics to comprehend things, and then went back. And when you read stuff that people have written, or you're hearing interviews where they're talking about um, different things like a territorial or a municipal jurisdiction, things like that, then all of a sudden, some of that stuff, those falsehoods just pop right out. And you realize that these people pretty much have no clue whatsoever what they're talking about. They're just kind of making stuff up because it doesn't exist anywhere. I even asked one of these people one time because they were talking about Benjamin Franklin, and they were talking about the difference between postmaster one word and postmaster two words. And I asked them where they were finding their information at. And honestly, they repeated back to me, this is what they said. They said, I don't remember. I just copy and paste. And I thought, oh, goodness. Because, I'll do some copy and paste stuff. But when I do, I always supply the source where people can go back and look. So anyway, sorry, what was that?
Going back to some of these so-called gurus, one of them is one thing you'll hear is except for value, exempt from levy. The hell's that?
Oh,
it's like
there's going to be things that will slide in that may work, a fraction of the time here and there. But I mean, there's standards that something has to meet in order to be exempt from levy. So, saying accepted for value, exempt from levy. Well, just being accepted for value doesn't make something exempt from levy. Those are almost conflicting terms in a way.
Right. Well, at least we know not to do the 45-degree angle.
Yeah, that amongst many things. I mean, and I'll tell you what, I do consults with people all the time, and it's very normal when I talk to somebody, and those conversations normally end up being 2 hours, the first conversation I normally have. But very often, because they'll detail item by item by item, things like that are taught in like the truth movement or the patriot movement or whatever you want to call it. And when I give them my information on each of those things, by the time end of the conversation rolls around, they normally tell me, they're like, "Oh my God, Brian, you have just blown apart everything I thought I had learned. And the thing is, if nobody's giving you any source information where you can go and learn about some of these topics that they're promoting, then you've really not learned anything. All you've learned is some of their personal ideas or ramblings or ideas that they heard from somebody else, that heard something from somebody else, that heard something from somebody else. And along the way, though, even going back, nobody had any factual information to back up that this is the way that you do it. That you're supposed to write notice to principals, notice to agent is notice to principal.
Yeah.
There's nothing legally out there that requires you to put that on anything. Um, Putting that on a legal document is like telling a farmer in Iowa that corn is green on the outside and yellow on the inside. And he's going to look at you like, gosh, you're brilliant. You know, well, it's the same thing they're going to think, you know, they say a document where you put something like notice to principals, notice to agent, notice to agent, notice to principal. I mean, to them, it's like, yeah, this is like, duh, you know, we know this. So why are you telling us stuff that is common knowledge? You know,
Yeah, or like putting your state representative on notice, or the coroner. The hell's that going to do?
yeah, yeah. People contacting the coroner wanting to have a meeting with them so they can sign something to prove that they're alive. I mean, they know you're alive. That's not what the whole situation is about. Actually, the situation goes back to the agent principal relationship. That's what's really happening. They're not seeing you as dead or anything like that.
Well, I guess if they assume we're dead, I mean, maybe the coroner's the right thing to do. I don't know.
No, they don't assume you're dead. They know you're alive. You know,
Or
if
lost
they
at sea.
if they assumed you were dead, then they wouldn't need to give 3 hots and a cot to people in jail, would they?
Right.
What's a dead man need a meal for?
Yeah. I mean, the legal system might assume you're lost at sea, but then I guess that there's a certain limit to how far that can work. You know.
Right. Well, in this lost at sea thing, this is all going back to 1666 Sedicate Trust from London, England. Because back at that time, they were experiencing something very similar to what we were told we were experiencing the past couple of years. And they're having their own little pandemic at that time. And their answer for it was to burn the city. That's how they were going to get rid of it. And which meant that a lot of people's properties got burned, everybody got displaced, things like that. And so the properties were held basically in trust, not in actual trust. They were held in trust until the people came back and proved that they're alive. They didn't die in the fire. They didn't move to another state somewhere, another city somewhere. They planned on remaining there and were able to reclaim their property. But that was done for a city that belongs to another country on a totally different continent about 400 years ago. That Seneca Trust from 1666 has absolutely nothing to do with men and women here, you know, in Ohio or Oregon, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, wherever you want to hail from. It has nothing to do with any of us.
Right. Well, yeah. We had the Global Estate Trust, and then there's a Sesticate from 1540, then 1666. So which one is it? It must be different continents then.
Yeah. I mean, but would somebody from Malaysia show up in England and try and make a claim under the 1666 Sedicate Trust? They'd laugh at them. And people wonder why they want to go and do mental evaluations on people at court. Well, this right here is a really good example of one of the reasons why they would want to do that.
Wow.
And especially when people go in, just dump tons of paperwork also like into a court case. I mean, bogging down the system, you're making yourself look like an idiot. Maybe you are an idiot, but at least making yourself look like you have absolutely no clue what you're doing. And I mean, I've seen some of the things people put in, and the documents or the motions they try filing just don't even pertain even close to whatever their case may be. They think it just sounds like a good motion, so they use it without even realizing what the terminology for the motion even means.
Well, that's why they put people in custody, because they were still minors. I mean, we never grew up.
Yeah, and that's probably the best way of looking at it, or putting it, because nobody's come forward and claimed who and what they are and what they're doing here, and it's just like if you go into another country, they're always going to ask you at the border, where are you coming from, where are you going to, what's your intent while you're here, how long do you plan on staying here, you know what I mean? Well, people enter into this administrative situation nowadays in the USA, or I would say any country, because a lot of people ask, well, does this pertain, to Ireland, or does this pertain to Austria? Or, I would say any country that is underneath the IMF, these same basic rules apply. And by the time you've reached the age of 18, age of majority, not necessarily the age of understanding, but maybe the age of majority, at least at that time, I firmly believe that you really need to be in contact with whatever powers that may be, and let them know what you are, what you're doing, what your intent is. Otherwise, you're just going to be looked at as the unwashed masses, that are idiots that need to be ruled. They don't know each and every one of us personally. They think of when you watch television and something happens in a city, and the people get all upset, and they all come out, and there's turning over cars, they're smashing windows, setting things on fire. Well, those are the people that they pretty much observe everybody else as being. And they know them by what? Their actions. They know them by their doing. They're demonstrating who they are. They know it through demonstration. And so, for that same reason, if you're one of the good guys, why aren't you demonstrating it? And demonstrating it by providing them notice of who and what you are, what you're doing, your intent for being here. Otherwise, they can only operate by presumption of law. That's what presumption of law is. They have to presume because they've not been told otherwise.
Yeah, we got to tell them we're not belligerent morons. At least identify who we are, and just explain, to the at least the state first, right? Then federal. At least put them on notice. I'm not a moron.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, my favorite thing to do really is to do that in a Dear John letter to them, in your goodbye letter to them. So hey, I know the war that you've got going on. I see what's happened. Nothing's going to change it. Just count me out. I'm not part of your battlefield.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
you're domiciled in your state or domiciled, and you're a neutral. Those are some good words, right?
Well, that I wouldn't even use. I don't even use the word domicile because depending on what you're reading, it can mean different things. It can mean the same as resident. It's on how it's observed. They say this is where I dwell. And what I think is interesting, I was listening to a speech a couple days ago. Somebody gave me from George Herbert Walker Bush, and he was referring to the UN and things that they were going to be doing in the future, and that they were going to be using uh, the UN to accomplish their goals, and it was going to be through, the peaceful intent of the UN. That's what the UN was intended for. It was intended to promote and spread peace. And one of the things that I think people don't realize is what their definition of peace is, because ultimately that's what they want from all wars. They say they're trying to instill a long and sustained peace. Well, they achieve their long and sustained peace through your submission, your consent to them. As long as the people are submissive, as long as the people are consenting, there will be peace. If not, there will be war until they get their peace.
Right. Yep. And that's why we're at war, so they can skirt all the rules, or half of them.
Yeah.
They assume a war. I mean, it's a paper war, right? There's no actual tanks in the street, but I mean they just need conflict, and that's one of the key things that they need.
Yeah, conflict is what is the fodder of their system. That's the fodder, or the food of the system is conflict. If there was no conflict, then there would be no need for courts, little to no need for police or a constable. All those things require conflict. And
even courts are civilized warfare. That's all it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's warfare that pays closer attention to the rules of the game. Yeah. So yeah, you leave in peace or go in peace. Whatever you do it through peace, and let them know what your peace is, because it's not your consent. I think that's something deep for people. I mean, if somebody wanted, I mean, you can spend a few days just doing a lot of research on that one word, peace, and find some pretty interesting things out there.
Sounds
Just
like
because they use the word peace doesn't mean it means what the common man thinks. Anyway, what have we been here? 20 minutes, half an hour? Anybody else have anything? Feel free. Otherwise, I think we'll wrap this up. If anybody has any particular topic or anything that they would like to see covered, feel free to let me know. This will probably go to YouTube. Leave it in the comments below in YouTube. I think I have pretty much covered about everything. If people go back on the playlist, at least on Talkshoe, because it goes back over 4 years. So probably closer to 5. And so pretty much everything has been covered at some time and point or whatever. But it's always fun to go back and do a refresher on various things. I've done 1 or 2 videos. I know the main one was correcting the presumption, just kind of what we were talking about tonight. I did that several months ago. You can find that on the YouTube playlist as well, correcting the presumption of status. And I've thought about maybe going and taking the half a dozen steps or whatever that I did on that and going into detail and just doing maybe one episode for each one of those steps could be helpful to people. Because like we were talking earlier about like DBA, that could be one as well right there. Because there's a lot of information behind that. There's a lot of things for people to stop and think about. And a lot of people really don't have a lot of knowledge, for instance, about the DBA. Not every state requires that a DBA be done. I think there's 14 states that don't require it. But then apart from that, those even that do require it, they all have their own little different viewpoints or processes or requirements when it comes to the DBA. People, for instance, wonder, a lot of people run out and get the Minnesota assumed name certificate, the ANC, because the Minnesota ANC, according to their thoughts, is accepted everywhere, which is not true. The ANC is just Minnesota's form of a DBA. And like I said, there's different requirements in all the different states. Some states require that it also be done in the county where you live. Well, gosh, if it needs to be done in the county where you live, then does it make any sense that it would work in a county in maybe even another state? No, absolutely not. It may not be accepted by another state. Ultimately, really, whether it's assumed name certificate or a DBA, different states call it different things, trademark, business name, these are all, at the very minimum, at least, valid for the state where you dwell. That's it. Sometimes some states may accept them favorably, and other times other states very well will not. So really, it's important just to cover your butt and make sure you do it for where you live. Florida, I believe, is one of the states where it's not required for a DBA to be done. But guess what? They've got a whole bunch of rules when it comes to the DBA. For Florida, you can do it for the county where you live, or you can do it for all counties. And I think that it's interesting that a state that doesn't require it to be done would go and list a whole bunch of regulations regarding it. Well, if you don't require it, then why do you need to list regulations? That's kind of double speak there, I think. So we got to pay attention to that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's one of the possibilities I've thought about doing upcoming, and is to go and detail those items in the presumptions video that I did. And until I even, when this posts to YouTube, I will go and put that particular video, correcting the presumptional status. I'll put that down in the description box. So if anybody listens to this and wants to check that out, they can access it much easier. But anyway,
May
nobody has anything. I think that's a wrap. Thanks for being here tonight, guys.
I? May I?
I think you got a question, Brian.
I can barely hear her.
Okay, it's a dumb question, but what's a DBA?
DBA stands for doing business as.
Oh,
All right. And
okay.
yep, just about all business owners have done one because they have to do contracts, sign checks, things like that for their business. And so they'll have a DBA in that. I remember when I originally was researching DBAs, something that I've looked for, but you can no longer find online. But I stumbled across the DBA for Nancy Pelosi the first time that she was Speaker of the House. And Nancy Pelosi's DBA was House of Representatives of the United States. So I found that kind of curious. But anyway,
I would very much like to. I would be very happy if you did a series of classes on rebutting the 12th presumption. Thank you.
yep. Absolutely. But like I said, we can go into these things in a little more detail in the future if people want. Just let me know. But until then, everybody have a wonderful week. Thanks for being here. And like I said, I'll throw that presumption of status video down in the description box for the YouTube link. And until then, see you next Sunday night, 9 o'clock Eastern. Good night, guys.
Thanks, Brian.